It's episode 4 already.
How is everyone?
I've been great since you last asked.
Things are, we're gearing up to publishing the spring issue of Opera now, so we're quite busy. And
Busy.
it is.
But an exciting issue.
It is. I can share that the incredible Barry Kosky is going to be our cover story in an interview with Mark Pullinger, everyone's favourite Mark Pullinger. And we're really looking forward to that because that's sort of looking ahead to March when Siegfried, second instalment of his Ring Cycle, is at the Royal Ballet and Opera.
Very exciting.
As always, we always start with a bit of news. And this week, the news is about Deborah Warner. And this is both surprising and not. So Deborah Warner, who is a British opera director. Opera is kind of, on her website, it's just a bit of, trivia. She describes herself as an opera and theatre director. So it's important to note that opera is and has been, for especially in more recent years, quite important to her. She has a production of Peter Grimes, which is coming back in, I want to say May, could be sooner, at the Royal Opera House in May. And then her most recent one before that was Botzek in 2023, which I saw was brilliant.
Yeah.
At the Royal Ballet and Opera as well. She's recently done Turn of the Screw in Rome. So she's very, very opera. Yeah, that's like a lot of her core stuff. She has a very good relationship with the singer Ian Bostridge, also Christine Rice, who I fangirled about in the last a few episodes ago. She was Sister Helen. And she also has an ongoing sort of creative partnership with Michael Labine. So her and Michael often collaborate on productions together.
The Winter Opera Now, our studio tour.
Exactly.
Michael Labine.
Exactly. Love Michael. So it's been announced that Deborah Warner is the new artistic director of the Park Avenue Armory in New York. Another succession of Pierre Audi. Pierre Audi is the guy that died very suddenly last May. He was also artistic director at Aix-en-Provence. So this is like the second announcement of a role kind of taking it from him. And this is another one that's happening immediately. So Deborah is now the artistic director. As far as I'm aware, she's based in the UK.
That's a long commute.
She's moving to America. I don't know exactly that. What's interesting about the Park Avenue Armory is beautiful. It's a very iconic building in New York.
Yeah.
Constructed between 1877 and 1881 as the 7th Regiment Armory. And then has become a sort of iconic venue known for productions that are site-specific. Because it's this huge building that sort of allows for a lot of cross-collaboration, exciting. The productions that happen there are often kind of performance art, quirky things, wacky. It's very wacky.
Nice.
Most recent opera thing that was there wasn't even really opera, sort of music theatre, which is that Faggots and Their Friends Between Revolutions. But before then, actually, I was looking up, Park Avenue Armory hasn't really done much opera. It did Weinberg's The Passengers in 2014. Another one was Louis Andriesen's Die Materie in 2016, which was quite iconic because it had a flock of sheep involved in a production.
Wow.
So other than those, there really hasn't been much opera at the Armory.
That's pretty exciting then.
Well, I'm wondering whether Deborah will bring that. Deborah does also do a lot of theatre, has done a lot of theatre. She sort of started her career in theatre, was the first woman to win an Olivier Award for Best Director. She has huge experience in opera, huge experience in drama, huge experience in site-specific productions, and she's kind of bringing them all together. Obviously, she doesn't really do dance or performance art stuff, but I think in her...
She probably will now.
In what she said she didn't actually apply for the role. She was asked to apply, and the more she kind of went through the process, the more she was like, wow, actually, this building and space is something I really want to do. So she is 66, so, a slightly older director, an artistic director, but... clearly someone with so much experience in this building and space, and also with a understanding of classical music and a love for classical music. Park Avenue Armory also do a recital series, so that they have lots of different spaces where they do really important side of things. So this is just an interesting appointment, and slightly surprising. I don't know why. I just felt a bit surprised.
I think it's good also if you can inject opera into these sort of, I would say, unusual spaces or places that don't usually have opera can bring out some really exciting things. Opera done in different ways, or let's say done in churches, or done in sort of warehouses or whatever. Taking opera, away from that sort of massive, big opera house scale sort of sphere and putting them into a sort of a closer, smaller, more intimate sort of setting, it could really bring opera to new audiences. So it's actually really good, exciting.
She's also been a great exponent of Britain opera.
It's a lot of modern opera, especially
a lot of
modern which is also very exciting.
Yeah, so hopefully there'll become more opera done at the Armory, which is very cool. Moving on. The main discussion today is about opera in English and operetta. So it's kind of hard to know where to start. I think there are lots of different perspectives to this. There's a big discussion about English National Opera, staging everything, making all their operas in English translation. The sort of levelling up agenda and making opera inclusive to all.
Accessible.
People think that having it in English, or think that having it in English is part of that accessibility. We had an article written by Claire Booth, who did research for an MA. She's a singer, but she also did an arts management degree. She did research into opera in the English language and looked into how much it actually influences audiences to go to a show. She kind of argued that art doesn't necessarily have to be understood always, and that some opera is more impactful in its original language, and that inviting people into a space where it is authentically produced in the original language can be very important and shouldn't be undermined.
It's quite interesting because I spoke to, when I was in Italy in summer, I spoke to a German journalist, and I was saying that one of the first operas I'd ever seen was at the ENO, and it was Marriage of Figaro translated into English. And I just told her, I was like, I actually thought the translation was quite clunky at some parts. It was trying to make things rhyme, or it was it kind of simplified some of the words, I thought, just a bit too much, where I was like, the translation was just a bit weird. And actually she pointed out to me, she was like, that is what translation is. She was like, you just are probably used to everything being in English. But she was like, if I watch a English TV show as a German, she was like, I often do find that the translation is always a bit weird, and you just kind of, she's like, this is surprising to you because you're probably not as used to that. But she was like, maybe Europeans or people are used to having to have English translated in. I thought it was just a bit, you just sort of notice that isn't how it was probably originally meant to be. But I do think there's something to be said for the accessibility.
Johnny
Go crazy, Jonny.
I am all for English translations.
And good for you.
And I'm not saying, and I know lots of people, usually they're singers, and usually there are people that can speak these other languages. Oh no, I prefer Italian. Obviously, the way they're originally written is how the composer set those words, and that is how the composer intended it to sound. There are some exceptions. For example, Wagner did want translations of his work when it went to other countries because he wanted it to be understood. I'm all for translations because, this sort of really came up with the Makopoulos case. I spoke about it last episode, and that's in Czech. And I don't know Czech. Not many people know Czech. I obviously know a little bit of, Italian, a bit Germans. So when, if I'm seeing something in German, I see what it is in English, I can sort of get the German as well a little bit. But with Czech, no chance. And I was watching them sing, and I just realised that everyone is just looking at the words at the back. It almost doesn't matter what they're singing. They could just be singing sounds that are the right notes, and the words at the back are what's telling us what they're saying. There's a piece by Stravinsky, an opera called Oedipus Rex. It was written in his sort of middle neoclassical time, and it's entirely in Latin. And to Stravinsky, it's just Latin. Doesn't matter what the words are, what they're saying, it's Latin, because Latin is a dead language. So we just hear Latin, it's old Latin sounds like the church, sounds like what Romans used to speak. So it's just there for the idea of it being Latin. It doesn't matter what the words are, and that's almost what it feels a bit like when we're just all watching the libretto just being pasted for us in front of the screen.
Oh, so he's choosing words based on what they sound like rather than what the words are meaning.
It's called the objectification of language. If we get fancy, but like
we can get fancy.
But yeah, and obviously Janacek knew what he's setting these words. He could speak Czech. He's setting them, and it's not like he didn't think of that. But to an audience, I almost wonder you could have an opera in concert and just change all the words that we're seeing written, and you probably wouldn't notice the difference in plot. So English, I didn't really. Yeah.
What I will say is sometimes when I'm watching an opera in English, I'm still reading the surtitles because of just the nature of how they're, making that sound. I'm actually not quite hearing all the word, or I want to double check. So even when it is in the English language, there's still that nature of reading what's up there.
But also just in media in general, we're in a subtitle era.
Oh, I always have subtitles.
But also that comes from, especially with like, I would say Netflix, also lots of films and stuff, their sound mixing they will sort of mix it for like big surround sound sort of spaces, and then when you watch it on just like your laptop or whatever, the
Spatial audio.
That's the key word of the podcast.
But no, Claire Booth's article was very interesting. I also didn't realise that the E&O didn't always have surtitles. They only came in about 2005.
I often feel like going to the opera, there has to be a kind of humility in like letting go of always understanding what's going on. And I am someone who kind of likes to research the synopsis before I go, so that then if I do want to close my eyes or look at what's going on and not always have my head going up, then I still have a kind of general sense of it. Because I think language and singing, like, do we have to like hear do you have to understand every single word's being sung? Like, can it just be a general impact? And one of the points Claire made as well was about in pop culture, we often have songs that go trending that no one really knows the meaning of.
Yeah, they mishear the words or whatever. It's like, oh, I never realised it was that. Or
but like, what she made, because this was written a couple of years ago, she said Despacito was her example, but recently Rosalie's album as well. Berghain?
Yeah,
yes,
Berghain,
yes,
the new album.
So poor librettists, firstly.
Obviously it needs to make sense, but does it always need to make...
I agree completely.
I thought you just said you agreed with it being English.
No, that doesn't mean, as you said,
Two
you
things
can't always hear the English.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
It's a bit different when when you see something in English that has surtitles. The surtitles sort of just let you key into what they're saying. It's like they're saying, "Oh, my father just died." Oh, I can actually now hear that now.
You're right.
Also, I think that you're right that. I mean, opera is more than just the words. There's all the music. There's the how they're singing as well. And we're getting a lot more. The words are there, but there's obviously so much more the emotion or what drives the characters, all that sort of stuff that is behind that. That you don't need the words to tell you that bit. There's also sorry.
No, I was gonna say there is I suppose there is something to be said for accessibility in terms of that. If you're getting introduced to opera, if you're new to it, it might be less daunting to know that it's not in a language you maybe aren't familiar with.
True.
It might be a good gateway, and maybe that's what are sort of thinking of themselves, the gateways to opera.
Yeah, because that is what spooks people off. They're like, oh, I don't know French, I don't know Italian or Russian or whatever.
But then again, I think the 20th century we really saw like a popularization of opera in English, and maybe you want to talk about operetta.
I was just gonna say so before that, but it's fine.
But I'm just thinking about like Britain.
Yeah.
Am I right in thinking he wrote all of his operas in English?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, I think they're all in English.
And then Michael Tippett as well was another kind of like, and then more recently Mark Anthony Turnage. It's like
George Benjamin.
George Benjamin.
All the Americans like John Adams and
of course.
That sort of. But I was going to say that also there's just a thing with just the fact of English and things like another lumpy language like German is that they don't fit opera singing as well as the likes of Italian, obviously where opera sort of grew, and French, which are obviously a lot smoother and they use a lot more sort of singable vowels, as it were. A friend of mine, when I was at university, did this one of his experiment, sort of dissertation was on sort of how people perceive sort of vowel sounds at different sort of parts of the register on a singer's voice. And I mean, you just like the sounds of like ooh. If you start going high, it starts to go just like a so it's like an A goes to E. Like your vowel sounds change at different points. There's obviously singers are having to like adjust, to whatever sounds best. But then that starts to sort of warp the sounds of these words in sounds that we hear a lot in English. No, we don't hear as much as English as we do in the likes of Italian. Italian also just sort of flows a lot nicer than sort of
It is a beautiful language.
German and English.
You say that.
There you go. That was German and English.
So tell us about Gilbert and Sullivan.
How long have you got? So you talk about English operas. So English operas sort of died in the sort of from about 18. I read a thing about like between 1830 and 1870, maybe a bit earlier. There were no through-sung English operas written. I read that may be a lie from D'Oyly Carte, but we'll come back to that. But the focus on, I mean, even wider classical music, like you talk about the 19th century, very rarely do British composers come up. It's always your Germans, your Italians, your French.
Holly might not know. It was known as Das Land ohne Musik.
The land without music.
Oui. Or should I say,
in that
ja.
era.
Yeah, so, and it sort of lasted a little bit into the 20th century as well, or sort of quite far into the 20th century as well. So operetta is French. It's a French art form, really. So it came around in Paris in sort of 1840s. And opera was existing in the royal opera houses across Europe. It was full of the upper classes. So the operetta was almost this sort of like, it was more aimed at say middle and lower classes. So there's a class differentiation in there already. It was usually spoken dialogue between the songs. But the thing about operetta, because of this sort of like, I would say reclaiming with sort of the people, it popped up all over the place. And like there's French operetta, German operetta, even like Filipino operetta. They've all got like their own style. And then sort of it must have been like mid 19th century is when sort of Gilbert and Sullivan popped up and again put the sort of the British stamp on it as well and went in sort of a slightly different direction. But it was sort of most significant sort of opera in English at that time. And in a way a little bit less like in the sort of continental Europe, it didn't go quite as like I want to say lower class or it's quite awkward talking when it comes to the class anyway because you still had like vaudeville, which was very sort of like the people. This was a bit further up. It was not the Royal Opera House, but it was operetta at the Savoy.
So in summary, opera in English, very interesting. Don't know how much of an impact it has on audiences wanting to go see something. Are they more likely to go when it's in English? Personally, don't think it makes that much of a difference.
I think you're right. Actual opera lovers, and if you're, going to several shows a year, maybe you're not going to really care. But maybe if it is going to be your first opera, I know I was a bit relieved that my first opera was Marriage of Figaro at the E&O. But then, was it my favourite one I've now seen? No, I've liked seeing them more in their original language, actually. But it was a nice gateway, I will say that.
It does depend on the translation, like Partenope.
I didn't think it was a great translation, to be fair.
And I saw Salieri's The Landlady by Bampton Opera in the summer.
Oh, you loved that.
And I loved it because the translation was done impeccably. Like it was like, it had the sort of the rhyme, the funny. It wasn't a bit too cheesy, like it could, if they can be, like The Merry Widow at the Glyndebourne was way too cheesy, that translation. Although, again, this sort of people look down on English opera or operas in English. If you translate a lot of, especially GNS, if you translate a lot of these sort of The Merry Widow or Fledermaus into English, they suddenly sound a lot like GNS, and they're not actually that different. So stop being so nasty to GNS, Holly.
It doesn't about GNS.
But I got some rando things I just want to say about language as well. when it comes to language,
Me down.
I'll tell you what really gets me when it's like, okay, obviously don't mind operas in their own language. I wouldn't have got to this point if I did. But I'll tell you, it's operas that have dialogue, and I'm thinking Carmen. Actually, I'm just thinking Carmen, where they have where the music stops, and suddenly we've got to watch these opera singers struggle through the French dialogue, and we're like, when's this dialogue going to finish?
The Carmen I was in did not have any dialogue.
Did it not?
No.
So Carmen, when it was first written, had loads of dialogue, and they just turned a lot of it into recit, but there is still some dialogue
Carmen
left.
at the
normally.
Arena de Verona. Yeah, that I would star in. Get your copies of Spring 2026 Opera now to hear about that. Yeah, that didn't have any dialogue, so.
Wow. What I will actually say though is the dialogue in the Magic Flute is deranged, but is just brilliant.
Oh, really?
Just watching the Queen of the Night, just like "Die sieben wachen Sonnenkreis," and "Dieses Stahl es hat vors Raster geschliffen." It's just
Jonny just wants to go German and
no,
head to the
because
podcast.
it's just like you just go off, do what you need to do, Queen. Literally, Queen of the Night.
Plays opera education is now, am I saying it right? Verismo?
Say it with an accent.
Verismo. Is it a way of singing that composers have put in that opera?
Not too far
Okay.
away.
That's what
Yeah.
I was thinking. I was thinking back to my
This
previous
sort of-
education, and I was thinking, is it similar to bel canto?
It sort of was like it sort of eclipsed bel canto. Bel canto died. Verismo
So
arrived.
Verismo translates as realism.
Oh, okay.
So if we think of bel canto as like the fancy schmancy, elaborate, decorative style, Verismo is more focused on reality, what's really going on. So it's kind of synonymous with like truth, and it was a kind of movement that wanted to portray the world with greater realism. So going from these stories that were more mystical or like aristocratic into the humans and their struggle.
Okay.
Like working class, like not your lords, your ladies, your kings, your queens, your
sisters, your cousins, and your aunts.
your sisters, cousins, your aunts, your gods, none of that.
Latter part of the 19th century. So actually, sisters and cousins and aunts were happening in England.
Could you give me an example of some operas which are
So
verissimo?
these are all operas that I feel like you might not have heard of. They are popular, but am I right in saying they're not as widely performed as some of? So it's okay. Like when people say Verismo, the ones that people like bring up is André Chenier.
Yeah.
Heard of it?
No.
Pagliacci.
Have heard of that,
The
yes.
clown one.
Yeah.
But some people argue that even Carmen and
Yeah.
La Boheme.
Oh yeah. I people argue
La
about
Boheme is surely that's the people.
Some people say that Puccini is like doesn't quite do it, but I think Puccini is like he pushes it even further.
Really?
Yeah, but we'll get on.
So the vocal style, less showy-offy.
Okay.
We do away mostly with the recitative. And it's more of a like through. The drama isn't kind of only saved for the arias. The arias are part of the through drama of the whole thing. Was that
Yeah, so if you think of when you saw like the Marriage of Figaro, and it's all very like solo, duet, chorus. It's just like recit, so it's all like going like this. Imagine now there's no stops between any of the music, and it just sort of flows. I mean, it's more realistic, as it were. Like it's sort of blurred the lines of this sort of form, so it's now just sort of natural. Sort of just it will react to the drama.
storytelling isn't interrupted
Yeah.
at all.
Okay.
So you can there are famous Verismo arias, like the famous one from André Chenier,
Yeah.
but generally, the storytelling isn't interrupted.
It sort of mapped the realism movement that was appearing in the play world in theatre, like the likes of Chekhov and Ibsen, and sort of realist plays, where suddenly they go a bit further than opera, in which their whole thing is that the action always happens off stage, and we're just seeing the reaction, the characters, like the characters' emotions and like reactions to the stuff that's happening. So it's pushing for this more and more realistic point of view. Although I love it with opera as well, because opera to me is the art form is fundamentally unrealistic, and so this sort of like push and pull of realism and unrealism or surrealism even is really fun, and I think it's quite engaging. It's the same with Macropolis case affair. It's very realist as well, or Verismo.
Apart from the 300-year-old woman.
Yeah, other than that, sometimes funky things happen. Yeah, this is why this is what I say with people that have the definition of Verismo. They're sort of too purist about it, and it's why the likes of. I mean,
You think Pacini also
Laborum
does
definitely
it?
is.
Well, yeah, that's what I was
But
thinking.
he
It is
does
the
a lot
people,
more
isn't it?
like songs and like it's still through composed, but you can sort of tell when an aria is starting. It just goes so much further with
Emotion.
emotion and also with the orchestration. I mean, I saw André Chenier, and it's a good opera, and I think it was good when it came out, but it does come off like sort of a poor man's Tosca.
You've heard it here first.
The thing I love about like Puccini's stance on Verismo is that how he incorporates sort of music in the world of these operas, or finds music in the world of these operas, and incorporates it into the score. So we'll just go for Tosca. At the end of the first act, Scarpia sings. He sings. He wants to get Tosca, but he's singing over the Te Deum that's being sung in the cathedral, the chapel. That's happening in the world. That's real. That music we're hearing on the choir sing is the real music, and he's singing with it. There's an integration. The start of the third act, before Mario Cavaradossi's execution, Puccini places all the bells like around the theatre, and they're sort of being rung. So this sort of like surround sound feel to it.
You're actually in the...
Like you're there.
Yeah.
And I mean, Tosca's an opera singer, so it sort of makes sense why she's doing all this big singing. At least it does to me. And even cases like Il Tabaro, one of the Trittico, and then the sort of like car horn sounds at the start of Giannaschicchi, the third one of that Trittico. So he's bringing this sort of... I just one of the reasons I love Puccini, because he just brings this world in as well.
Is Puccini considered a Verismo composer? Not really. Who are the composers that are known for this style?
Mascagni, Leoncavallo, Giordano, and Puccini.
Okay.
But do you know about Il Trittico?
Ooh.
Tell her what Il Trittico is.
Ooh.
Go on.
Il Trittico is a trilogy. That's literally his trilogy, and it's 3 sort of 90-minute, maybe a bit less operas. They're all just one act. Il Tabaro, Suor Angelica, and Giannaschicchi. First two, Il Tabaro is usually one that's heard. We don't hear it as much because a trilogy is really hard to put on. So lots of opera houses just cut Il Tabaro and just have Suor Angelica, interval, Giannaschicchi. Il Tabaro and Suor Angelica are both sort of tragic. That's the other thing with Verismo. Usually everyone dies at the end, or someone dies. They're never really funny. Never really funny. They're rarely funny. However, Giannaschicchi, the third one, is funny. It's a comedy, which is actually quite refreshing if you ever like watch the 3. And it famously has it "O mio babbino caro," "O mio babbino caro," beautiful song, and it's for a comedy. But again, I think in like there's an argument there that Giannaschicchi is also Verismo because of the way the sort of the chitter chatter between like the families arguing. It's a bit silly, but there's also like it feels a lot more sort of like down to earth and sort of what's the word, domestic, which I think is another thing they like in Verismo, is this sort of like the domestic scenes, like Pagliacci, because I think it starts off I've been a long time since I've seen it, he like before the show happens he has all his arguments and stuff with his wife.
James Charlton, the Rising Star, I interviewed a couple issues ago, said that was his dream role.
Oh yeah, it's a banger of a role. Oh, a banger.
That's how I've heard of it.
So now, on to the review section. Well, I'm joined by our fantastic and very esteemed colleague and critic, Mark Pillinger, who has just literally this minute got back from a very exciting weekend in Paris. Hello, Mark. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Literally just back from Eurostar, so settled in after a pretty busy weekend, actually.
Yeah, so I mean, it's been a very exciting time to be in Paris. I saw someone's story yesterday that said it feels like everybody in the opera world has descended on Paris.
Very much so.
Was the weekend, was there a kind of operatic energy? Did it feel very exciting to be there?
Yes, I mean, I love Paris. I haven't been since last June when I did Les Brigands and the Faust the Opera Comique for you. So I went back to the Opera Comique actually on Sunday afternoon, not reviewing, just bought a ticket because yes, critics do buy tickets to go and see things.
Especially Mum.
And there's a new production opened at the start of last week of Massenet's Werther by Ted Hoffman, who of course is very much in the news at the moment because he's taking over the artistic directorship of the Festival d'Aix-en-Provence. And so he's fairly high profile and people are quite keen to see him. So I was quite interested to see this Werther, to see what it was like. And I had a lovely seat at the side of the first tier of boxes. And so I could see into the pit. And the interesting thing here, it was a period ensemble. It was Pygmalion with Raphael Pichon conducting, who I've seen conduct at the Proms before. I've seen him conduct at Salzburg, although that was the Vienna Phil. But to watch him conduct this music with this orchestra was very, very special. Not least his layout in the pit. He had the woodwind players directly in a semicircle just in front of him. And then the strings were behind them. So the synchronicity between strings and principal wind players was incredible.
Whoa, it's so exciting that Pygmalion taking on, things beyond what they're known for, beyond the sort of period pieces, and to see them do Massenet must have been so fascinating. And of course, the principal roles, Penny Patty and Adele Charvet. Tell us about the singing first of all.
The singing was mostly very good. I mean, I'll make no secret of the fact I booked to see this when booking opened because it was supposed to be Maria Cribassa singing Charlotte, who I adore, and actually singing it this summer in Salzburg in a concert performance. But she pulled out a few months ago, and Adele Charvet was brought in, who is also a fantastic mezzo, and she was, for me, the vocal highlight of the afternoon. She's just so expressive and so invested in the role, and this is something that actually Ted Huffman does very well. Thinking back to his Onegin at Covent Garden, which I didn't particularly like the production, but the Personenregie, the direction of the singers, is very strong, and she really took it and ran. Whereas Penny Patty is perhaps a little bit less of a stage animal, would be a kind way of saying it. He sang very beautifully, particularly when he was singing softly. Sometimes intonation goes a little bit where he pushes hard. But we also had John Chest, who some people might remember from the Glyndebourne Palace and Melisande some years ago. He was singing Albert, and Julie Rosset was Sophie, Christian Imler as Le Bailly. It was a very nice cast.
Mm. And I mean, from the photos, my overwhelming feeling was, oh, that's a lot of chairs.
Yeah.
Um,
Just like Onegin.
a lot of chairs and an organ. I know, I mean, we're with Werther, we're kind of Christmas Eve, we're sort of intimate sort of energy. Tell us about what Ted chose to do.
Well, basically, it's like his ROH Onegin in that it's a plain black box with the chairs around the sides that were then brought on for various scenes. The organs at the back because we open in July and the children are rehearsing Christmas carols with the Bailey. And then at the start of the second act, it takes place outside a church, and you hear the church organ from the inside. So that was presumably his reason for having an organ on stage. But basically, everything happens on this same single unit set, and so there's not an enormous amount to look at. Charlotte brings in the Christmas tree for at the start of Act 3, which she and Sophie then decorate with like half a dozen baubles. Very minimalist style Christmas tree to go with the minimalist style production. And then, unfortunately, leading into Act 4, there's this orchestral interlude. And during this, all the rest of the cast come on stage to clear the chairs, the tables, the tree, the baubles. And so it's a very busy time to have a completely bare stage for Werther, who here doesn't shoot himself, because he sends the note to Albert asked to borrow his pistols, and Charlotte thinks, something's going off here. So she's taking the pistols to him, hoping she's not too late. Except he's supposed to have shot himself by this point. When she turns up, he's slashed his wrists, and so it's just the two of them on stage and a very big pool of blood.
Oh, wow. Okay. I'm getting the sense maybe this minimalism isn't how you visualize Werther to work. I saw We Are the Lucky Ones this March last year.
I get that opera is really expensive to put on, but also opera tickets are really expensive. And if you paid out that amount of money to go and see a show, show me something, entertain me, I want to be taken from my 2026 life, and I want to experience what's happening on stage. I want to lose myself in what's there. And if there's nothing there, well, as I say, the direction of the things itself was very good, but I wasn't, having not really liked his Onegin, I wasn't massively surprised by what I saw yesterday.
Well, we got more to come from Ted with Carnival Vixen coming up in Berlin, and then after that, Tosca at Glyndebourne. So, yeah, we'll see. We'll see what he chooses to do with those two very, very iconic pieces of music. But in terms of being given an escape, I feel like moving on to talk about Ralph Fiennes' Eugene Onegin. Maybe it was before and after. Maybe it felt like light and dark in comparison. What were your kind of feelings going into watching this? Did you have any sort of?
I had high expectations in that I loved the movie he did. With it's late 90s, 99, and it's here on DVD. I loved it for years. Directed by his sister Martha. He was obviously very into the Pushkin and the characters, and he knows these characters inside out, and you can tell that he cares for these characters. Just in the way Tchaikovsky did. I mean, Tchaikovsky was so sort of tied up emotionally with particularly Tatiana. He adored her. And Tchaikovsky himself wanted this to be sung by young singers. It was premiered actually by students at the Moscow Conservatory, and he feared that what would happen if his operatic characters were put onto the stage with all this senseless tradition and veteran singers, and I think he called them talentless stage directors. I'd kind of love to know what he thinks about some of the productions that take place today. But really, what Ralph Fiennes does with this is not too dissimilar to what Ted Huffman does. They're both very minimalistic productions, except this one is gorgeous to look at. Essentially, because the designer is Michael Levine, who I know Holly interviewed for the last issue. It's a lovely feature. And he's a very intelligent stage designer. And what you've essentially got is a bit like a Klaus Gutt style white box set with doors, except it's not a white set. It's lined with like a print of birch trees, silver birch trees, which immediately locates you in the Russian countryside. So when the first scene opens, you've actually got the trees there, and the stage is covered in leaves, which and I thought that was interesting that Michael Levine designed the Robert Carson Onegin, which is very, very famous production, which was at the Metropolitan Opera. I think it's since gone to Chicago. I think Canadian Opera Company did it, revived it not too many seasons ago. And that has an iconic scene where the stage was covered in leaves with Dmitry Ostrovsky and Renee Fleming when it was new. So I wondered if that was like a little kind of self-reference. but it's just gorgeous to look at. But then for the whole of the first 2 acts, you feel that you are in the countryside. So the second scene, which takes place in Tatiana's bedroom, there are still leaves on the stage. A wall comes out of the back wall, so you've still got some silver birches, but there's a window there that opens out. You can add Sandro Carletti, the lighting designer, has lovely moonlight kind of effects. But she actually has a bedroom. She actually has a bed. She actually has a desk to sit and write at, which, I said in my review, it sounds like I'm being facetious, but I'm not. I've seen so many sopranos sprawled on the floor trying to write something, or even productions where there's no actual writing of the letter. So this was just beautiful to watch. And then you could then focus in on this big stage, on this small pull-out set, where you could watch the soprano Rujan Montesian, who is just so expressive. You can tell the work that Ralph Fiennes has done with her. I mean, she's sung the role many, many times. She knows it inside out. She's done Barry Kosky's Komische Oper production several times, as well as other houses. But just to watch her expressiveness and the way that when she's writing this letter and debating or, going through her mind what to include, what to put in, and you can see her get bolder and bolder until when she signs it off, there's this huge, confident kind of feel about her, which I found incredibly moving.
I'm really interested, sort of specifically, what is it that Fiennes was able to give singers in terms of, is it a confidence? Is it a sort of character that maybe you haven't seen before? What is it that Fiennes gave these singers that maybe you haven't seen in that piece before?
These are all experienced singers in their roles, apart from Susan Graham, who has never sung a Russian opera before. So the main principals are all very experienced. They probably bring a lot of baggage to the production from previous productions. And I imagine what they perhaps enjoyed about this was the simplicity of it and the fidelity to the libretto, to what it says in the score, in the staging. It's all there, and he allows them the space to grow into their characters. I mean, Onegin is a very interesting character because he's bored of life. I mean, he's very young. We mustn't forget. I think Tatiana's like 15 at the start of the opera. He's not much older. I think by the St. Petersburg Act, he's only 26. So for someone so young to be so cynical and tired of life, crap's happened to him, and the crap that happens to him here is the killing of his friend Lenski, the poet, in the duel, and you can really see how that plays out on Boris Pinkasovich, who is the Onegin here. So at the start of the third act, we're suddenly in St. Petersburg, so we lose the silver birch box. We've now got beautiful St. Petersburg Palace, all in gold and white, classic sort of color scheme. But there's snow has been falling, so there's still kind of the sense of the outside intruding, invading here. And during the Polonaise, on stage is still the body of Lenski, who very quickly disappears. But you can see that what Fiennes is doing is he's planting in the audience's mind that Onegin is still haunted by this. It's not something he's trying to get over. And then, the way that Onegin behaves in the opera, he's slightly supercilious and whatever. But when Tatiana writes him in this letter, I think his response is pretty much model behavior. He brings back the letter. He returns the letter to her, so he's not holding on to it. It can't be used incriminatingly against her. And he says to her, look, I'm not the marrying kind. If I were, you'd be the ideal bride, but it's not you, it's me, kind of thing. And he lets her down, and you can tell that she is absolutely mortified. I mean, if that scene really works, you can sense Tatiana, who here is sitting on a chair, just wishing that the ground would open up and swallow her. And that's exactly how that scene should work. But he's trying to let her down, but then at the party scene that follows, he's easily kind of swayed into winding up Lenski a bit by deciding to dance with Olga. And when you look at Pinkasevich's acting here, you can see he's having a lovely time with Olga, and he's enjoying watching Lenski's responses. He knows exactly what he's doing, but then it kind of blows up into this overreaction from Lenski and the whole challenge and the duel scene. And then, of course, when Act 3 comes, when he sees Tatiana as the Princess Gremina, that's when something flips inside him and he realizes, crikey, I actually love this person, and what an idiot I was all those years ago to turn her down. And that's when he just kind of like unravels, writes the letter to her using the same music that Tchaikovsky uses for Tatiana when she's writing her letter to him. And so you get this reversal of situations where at the end she admits that I do still love you, but I'm married now. And that's when he's just completely destroyed. And what I liked that Fiennes did here, in the early acts, Tatiana had a shawl. And in this final scene, she's got that same shawl. And Onegin ends up holding it, lying on the ground, just hugging the shawl. See, just that he's broken.
I'm also really curious, because you are someone who is very interested in dance as well. And I was struck, I saw there was a choreographer credited, Sylvie Leplain.
Yes.
Is that right? Tell us about how and why do you think Fiennes used movement and choreography?
I've seen so many productions of Onegin where there is no dancing or minimal dancing because the set designer and director haven't left enough space on stage for any kind of dance. But for me, dance is crucial to this opera because it's a 3-act opera. And in Act 1, you've got the peasants who come in, they bring in the harvest, and they dance this peasant dance. It's really invigorating, lively kind of dance. And in the 2nd act, you move up a strata. So you've got the Tatiana's name day ball. So you've got the country gentry, as it were, who think they're probably slightly better, more middle class than they are, and they're dancing a waltz. And then you get to St. Petersburg in Act 3, which is a grand polonaise. And it just shows the progression, the arc through the story. And I think when the dance is not cut, because you wouldn't cut the music as a conductor, as a music director, but when the dance gets scrubbed out of the staging, it's like, they didn't know what to do here, or they didn't have the space or the means to be able to do it. So to see dance used in this was very good. And it's also very imaginative because the Polonaise was danced by 12 professional dancers, 6 men, 6 women. The men were dressed as hussars. The women were in big black crinoline dresses. And then there's a second dance after the Polonaise, there's an Écossaise, where Onegin you can see is haunted by these memories of what's happened with Lenski and so on. And when the male dancers appear, they're all wearing like bear heads. So there's a slight phantasmagoria going on there, which I thought was brilliantly done.
I'm interested, do you think Fiennes was quite naturally adjusted to the sort of musicality and the direction of musicality in this? Or do you think it must have been something that he had to try and get used to? Does that make sense?
I don't know how much opera he's necessarily seen. I know from various interviews that I think it was Semyon Bychkov who knew Fiennes, had met Fiennes previously, and when he was when Bychkov was invited, what do you want to do in Paris? This was obviously before he'd been made the incoming music director, he wanted to revisit Onegin, which he'd done in Paris many years ago. I think it was 1992 at the Châtelet Theatre, where there was a very young Dmitry Borostovsky, who'd only won Cardiff Singer of the World 3 years previously. And they did this production, which was a great success. It was recorded. I think when I did for Gramophone a collection on Eugene Onegin, this was my top choice. Bitchkov kind of just feels this music. He's a great Tchaikovsky conductor, and so when he decided to take on Onegin, he was meeting Fiennes at something, and he invited him and saying, I think you should direct it because I love the film that you did and so on, and that obviously just planted a seed. And I'm sure that Fiennes and Bitchkov have worked very closely together.
So you could feel that kind of synergy.
Yes.
I mean, I know there were interviews of them and they looked physically very trusting of each other. There was a kind of unspoken, I've really felt, wow, I didn't realize quite how close Semyon and Fiennes seemed to feel.
Yes.
Which must have been important for a first opera. And there was a sort of humility. I don't know if you felt that, but from Fiennes of kind of Maestro Bitchkov, wow,
yes.
Thank you for your leadership and guidance through this.
Yeah, definitely. And I know that Fiennes spent quite a lot of time in the autumn around the Opera House just to get a feel for how an opera company works in terms of through rehearsals and the different things going on, because he obviously didn't go into this lightly, and so what he's put on is very faithful, very loving. It's not outrageous and daring in a way that some productions would be, but I would argue that particularly with Onegin, it doesn't need to be.
And Tatiana gets her desk.
It needs to be simply done. It needs to be sincere, and I think sincerity was what I got most from both the musical performances and from the direction.
Wow, you really are making me quite jealous because it's all sold out, hasn't it?
Yes, it's sold out. It will be streamed, I believe, on France TV, and then Paris Opera have their own streaming service called Paris Opera Play Pop, and I'm sure it will appear on there within weeks, I would have thought.
Oh, that's so exciting.
Definitely worth seeing, and I'm sure it's the sort of production that's going to be revived.
So, Mark, you're now back in London, but knowing you must have plans to see something else.
Well, more Russian opera on Thursday. I'm off to see Boris Godunov revival with Bryn Terfel.
Oh, so exciting!
Back to Boris.
But after that, what's your next big excitement? Would you say?
New production of Louisa Miller in Vienna with Nadine Sierra.
Oh, fun!
Which I'll be writing that for you and looking forward to it enormously.
Amazing. Well, Mark, thank you so much. I'm so glad you had such a good weekend in the most amazing city. And yeah, thank you for sharing your thoughts and hope to speak to you again very, very soon.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Hattie.
And thank you very much for joining us for this.
Thank you for joining us again.
Just sort of ranting for 40 minutes. But, it's all good.
As always, follow us at Opera Now Magazine on social media, Instagram mainly.
Comment, like, subscribe, and let us know if you want us to talk about anything particular, or
anything
talk to
that
anyone.
Anything that I should be taught about.
Something that Holly needs to know. There's
missing.
lots to do. Till next time.